The island of Kos sits quietly in the Aegean Sea, its limestone cliffs catching the morning light as fishing boats return with their catch. The gentle lapping of waves against ancient stones carries whispers of a legacy that began here over 2,000 years ago. On this small Greek island, a man was born who would revolutionize how humanity understands health, disease, and the sacred relationship between physician and patient. His name was Hippocrates, and his influence stretches across millennia to touch every medical practice, every hospital, and every healing hand in the modern world. It is around 460 BC, and the ancient world is alive with intellectual ferment. Athens is entering its golden age. Socrates walks the agora asking his piercing questions. Democritus ponders the nature of atoms. The great tragedies of Aeschylus and Sophocles move audiences to tears and wonder. Into this world of expanding human knowledge comes a child whose curiosity about the human body and its ailments will reshape medicine forever. But before we explore the revolutionary ideas that earned him the title Father of Medicine, we must understand the world he inherited and the profound transformation he would bring to healing. Medicine before Hippocrates was a realm dominated by gods and spirits. When illness struck, people turned not to physicians but to priests. Disease was divine punishment. Recovery required appeasement of angry deities through ritual, sacrifice, and prayer. The god Asclepius ruled over healing, and his temples served as the primary medical institutions. Patients would sleep in sacred chambers, hoping for divine visions that would reveal their cure. Priests interpreted dreams and prescribed treatments based on religious tradition rather than observation of symptoms. This supernatural approach to medicine was not unique to Greece. Across the ancient world, from Mesopotamia to Egypt, illness was understood as a spiritual crisis requiring spiritual solutions. Egyptian physicians, despite their sophisticated knowledge of anatomy gained through mummification, still attributed disease to demons and evil spirits. Babylonian medical texts mixed practical remedies with elaborate incantations designed to drive out malevolent forces. The human body was seen as a battleground between good and evil, health and sickness, divine favour and divine wrath. But on the island of Kos, a different tradition was quietly taking root. The Asclepieion, the great healing temple dedicated to the god of medicine, had begun to attract physicians who combined religious ritual with careful observation of patients. These early medical practitioners, known as Asclepiads, claimed descent from the god himself and formed a hereditary guild of healers. They passed down their knowledge from father to son, developing techniques that relied increasingly on natural remedies and physical examination rather than purely spiritual intervention. Young Hippocrates was born into this tradition. His father, Heraclides, was an Asclepiad, as was his grandfather Hippocrates. From childhood, he was immersed in a world where healing was both sacred calling and practical craft. He learned to prepare herbal medicines, to observe the progression of diseases, and to understand the delicate balance of forces that governed human health. But unlike his predecessors, Hippocrates possessed a mind that questioned everything, that refused to accept traditional explanations simply because they had always been accepted. The Greece of Hippocrates' youth was undergoing a profound intellectual revolution. Philosophers like Thales and Anaximander had begun to seek natural explanations for natural phenomena. Instead of attributing earthquakes to the anger of Poseidon, they theorized about the physical forces that might cause the earth to shake. Instead of seeing eclipses as omens of doom, they calculated the movements of celestial bodies. This new way of thinking, based on observation and reason rather than myth and tradition, would profoundly influence the young physician growing up on Kos. As Hippocrates matured, he began to apply this rational approach to medicine. He spent countless hours observing patients, noting the progression of their symptoms, recording which treatments worked and which failed. He travelled extensively throughout the Greek world, studying different approaches to healing and learning from physicians in other cities. What emerged from these years of study and practice was a revolutionary understanding of disease that would challenge the very foundations of ancient medicine. The breakthrough came gradually, through careful observation and relentless questioning. Hippocrates noticed that certain diseases seemed to follow predictable patterns. Malaria struck during specific seasons and in particular locations. Epidemic diseases spread from person to person in ways that suggested natural rather than supernatural causes. Injuries healed according to observable principles that had nothing to do with divine intervention. Slowly, methodically, he began to construct a new framework for understanding health and illness. This framework rested on a radical proposition that the human body was not a passive vessel for supernatural forces, but a complex system governed by natural laws that could be understood through careful study. Disease was not punishment from angry gods, but the result of imbalances within this natural system. Recovery came not through divine intervention, but through the body's own healing powers, assisted by treatments based on rational understanding of how the body worked. The theory that emerged from Hippocrates' observations became known as the doctrine of the four humours. According to this system, the human body contained four fundamental fluids: the blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Health resulted from the proper balance of these humours, while disease occurred when one or more humours became excessive or deficient. Different temperaments and physical constitutions reflected different humoral balances, explaining why some people were naturally melancholic while others were sanguine, choleric, or phlegmatic. This humoral theory may seem primitive to modern eyes, but it represented a revolutionary advance in medical thinking. For the first time, disease had natural rather than supernatural causes. Symptoms could be explained through observable physical processes. Treatment could be based on rational principles rather than religious ritual. The physician became a scientist as well as a healer, someone who studied the body's workings and applied knowledge systematically rather than relying on divine inspiration. Hippocrates and his followers developed an elaborate system of diagnosis based on humoral theory. They learned to read the signs of humoral imbalance through careful examination of patients. The colour and consistency of urine revealed the state of internal fluids. The appearance of the tongue, the quality of the pulse, the temperature of the skin, all provided clues to the underlying humoral disturbance. By learning to interpret these signs, physicians could not only diagnose current illness, but predict its likely course and outcome. Treatment followed logically from diagnosis. If a patient suffered from an excess of blood, the physician might recommend bloodletting to restore balance. If phlegm was the problem, warming treatments and drying medicines would help. Yellow bile excess called for cooling treatments, while black bile required purging and purification. Diet, exercise, climate, and lifestyle all played crucial roles in maintaining humoral balance and preventing disease. But Hippocrates' revolution extended far beyond medical theory. He transformed the very conception of what it meant to be a physician. In the ancient world, healers had been primarily religious figures, intermediaries between human suffering and divine power. Hippocrates envisioned physicians as natural philosophers, students of the human body who applied reason and observation to understand and treat disease. This new vision of the physician required not only medical knowledge, but moral character of the highest order. Hippocrates understood that people in pain and fear were vulnerable, that the relationship between doctor and patient was inherently unequal, and therefore required careful ethical guidelines. He and his followers developed a code of conduct that emphasized the physician's duty to help patients while avoiding harm, to respect patient confidentiality, and to maintain the highest standards of personal and professional behavior. The famous Hippocratic Oath, though probably not written by Hippocrates himself, embodied these ethical principles in a form that has guided physicians for over 2 millennia. The oath required doctors to swear by the gods of healing that they would use their knowledge only for good, never to harm patients, never to assist in suicide or abortion, never to violate the trust placed in them by those seeking help. They promised to live lives of moral purity and to pass on their knowledge only to worthy students who would uphold the same high standards. This emphasis on medical ethics was perhaps Hippocrates' most lasting contribution to medicine. While his theories about humours and disease mechanisms have been superseded by modern science, his insistence that physicians must be guided by moral as well as technical principles remains as relevant today as it was in ancient Greece. Every doctor who takes a medical oath, every hospital that posts ethical guidelines, every medical school that teaches professional responsibility is following in the footsteps of the physician from Corpus who first understood that healing is as much a moral as a technical endeavour. The practical impact of Hippocratic medicine was immediate and profound. Physicians trained in the new methods began to achieve better results than their traditional counterparts. By focusing on natural causes and treatments, they could often help patients who had not responded to religious healing. By carefully observing the course of diseases, they could provide more accurate prognoses and more effective treatments. Word of these successes spread throughout the Greek world, attracting students to Kos and carrying Hippocratic methods to cities across the Mediterranean. The island of Kos became a beacon for those seeking to understand the mysteries of human health through reason rather than superstition. Students arrived from Athens, Sparta, Alexandria, and distant colonies, drawn by reports of miraculous cures achieved through observation and logic rather than prayer and sacrifice. The Hippocratic school that emerged was unlike anything the ancient world had seen before. It was part medical academy, part research institution, and part philosophical movement dedicated to transforming humanity's relationship with disease and healing. Under the olive groves and marble colonnades of the Asclepieion, a new generation of physicians learned to see the human body with fresh eyes. They studied anatomy through careful dissection when possible, though Greek religious customs limited such practices. They learned to distinguish between different types of fever, to recognize the signs of internal bleeding, to understand how diet and environment affected health. Most importantly, they learned to think like scientists, forming hypotheses about disease causation and testing them through careful observation of patients. The methodology that Hippocrates developed was revolutionary in its systematic approach. Rather than treating each case of illness as an isolated supernatural event, his followers learned to look for patterns. They kept detailed records of symptoms, treatments, and outcomes. They compared cases to identify similarities and differences. They studied the relationship between disease and factors like age, sex, occupation, and geographic location. This empirical approach allowed them to accumulate knowledge in ways that had been impossible under the old religious system. One of the most significant advances was the development of clinical observation as a cornerstone of medical practice. Hippocratic physicians learned to use all their senses in examining patients. They looked carefully at skin colour, facial expression, and posture. They listened to breathing patterns and vocal changes. They felt for lumps, swelling, and changes in temperature. They even tasted urine to detect sweetness that might indicate certain diseases. This comprehensive sensory examination became the foundation of diagnostic medicine. The famous work known as the Hippocratic corpus emerged from this intense period of observation and theorizing. Though comprising texts written by multiple authors over several generations, these medical writings represent the accumulated wisdom of the Hippocratic school. They include detailed descriptions of diseases, surgical procedures, dietary recommendations, and philosophical reflections on the nature of medicine itself. Reading these ancient texts today, one is struck by their careful attention to detail and their remarkably modern emphasis on evidence-based reasoning. Perhaps the most revolutionary aspect of Hippocratic medicine was its approach to epidemic disease. When plague struck Athens during the Peloponnesian War, traditional physicians fled or proved helpless in the face of divine wrath. But Hippocratic-trained doctors remained to study the disease, documenting its symptoms, progression, and patterns of spread. They noticed that the plague seemed to pass from person to person, that it affected different age groups differently, and that some individuals appeared naturally resistant. These observations laid the groundwork for understanding infectious disease in ways that would not be fully developed until the modern era. The Hippocratic approach to surgery was equally groundbreaking. While earlier physicians had performed basic procedures, they often combined surgical intervention with elaborate rituals designed to appease the gods. Hippocratic surgeons focused purely on the technical aspects of their craft. They developed sophisticated techniques for treating fractures, dislocations, and wounds. They understood the importance of cleanliness in preventing infection, though they lacked modern knowledge of bacteria and antisepsis. Their surgical instruments were carefully designed and maintained, and their procedures were based on anatomical knowledge rather than religious tradition. Women's health received particular attention in Hippocratic medicine. The corpus includes extensive writings on gynecology and obstetrics that reveal a surprisingly sophisticated understanding of female anatomy and reproductive physiology. Hippocratic physicians recognized that women's health issues required specialized knowledge and developed treatments specifically tailored to female patients. This represented a significant advance over earlier approaches that had often viewed women's health problems as manifestations of spiritual impurity or divine punishment. The psychological aspects of illness also received unprecedented attention from Hippocratic physicians. They recognized that mental and emotional states could significantly impact physical health. They understood that fear, grief, and anxiety could worsen disease symptoms, and that hope and positive expectations could aid recovery. This holistic approach to healing, which considered the patient as a complete human being rather than simply a collection of symptoms, became a hallmark of Hippocratic medicine. The training of physicians under the Hippocratic system was rigorous and comprehensive. Students began with extensive study of theoretical knowledge, learning about humoral theory, anatomical structure, and the properties of various medicines. But this theoretical foundation was always combined with hands-on practical experience. Students accompanied established physicians on their rounds, observing the examination and treatment of patients. They learned to prepare medicines, to perform basic surgical procedures, and to manage the complex ethical challenges that arose in medical practice. The reputation of Hippocratic medicine spread far beyond the Greek world. Physicians trained on Kos were sought after in Rome, Egypt, and other centers of learning. They carried with them not only specific medical techniques, but a fundamentally different way of thinking about health and disease. This intellectual revolution gradually transformed medical practice throughout the Mediterranean region and beyond. The economic impact of this medical revolution was substantial. Effective physicians could command high fees and social status. Cities competed to attract the best medical practitioners. The development of a professional medical class created new economic opportunities and contributed to the growing complexity of urban societies. Medical knowledge became a form of valuable intellectual property that could be taught, learned, and transmitted across cultural boundaries. But perhaps the most profound impact of Hippocratic medicine was philosophical rather than practical. By demonstrating that disease could be understood through natural causes and treated through rational intervention, Hippocrates helped establish the principle that human reason could unlock the mysteries of the natural world. This intellectual foundation would prove essential to the later development of scientific thinking in fields far beyond medicine. The influence of Hippocratic ideas extended into areas that might surprise modern readers. Political theorists began to apply medical metaphors to the health of states and societies. Philosophers used the concept of balance and harmony from humoral theory to discuss ethics and human behavior. Artists and writers drew inspiration from the Hippocratic vision of the human body as a complex but comprehensible system governed by natural laws. As Hippocrates aged, he could see the transformation his ideas had wrought spreading across the known world. Temples that had once relied purely on religious healing now incorporated natural treatments. Physicians who had once attributed all disease to divine displeasure now looked for physical causes and rational remedies. Students who had once memorized ancient incantations now learned to observe, question, and reason. The revolution that had begun on a small Greek island was reshaping civilization itself. The transformation was not without resistance. In Athens, conservative priests denounced the new medicine as impious, arguing that illness remained the domain of the gods and that mortal physicians who claimed to heal through natural means were guilty of hubris that would surely bring divine retribution. In Sparta, military leaders worried that rational medicine would weaken the warrior spirit by removing the fear of supernatural punishment that helped maintain discipline. Across the Greek world, traditional healers fought to preserve their authority and livelihood against the growing influence of Hippocratic practitioners. Yet the evidence proved irresistible. When Hippocratic physicians successfully treated conditions that had baffled temple healers for generations, when their predictions about disease progression proved accurate, when their natural remedies achieved results that prayers and sacrifices could not match, even the most skeptical observers began to take notice. The power of systematic observation and rational treatment spoke louder than any theological argument. Hippocrates himself became a figure of almost legendary status during his lifetime. Stories circulated throughout Greece of his remarkable diagnostic abilities, his compassionate treatment of patients, and his unwavering commitment to medical ethics. It was said that he could predict the course of an illness simply by examining a patient's complexion and breathing. Rulers and common citizens alike sought his services, and his reputation extended far beyond the borders of the Greek world. One of the most famous episodes in his career occurred during a devastating plague that struck the northern Greek city of Abdera. The citizens, desperate for help after their traditional healers had proved powerless, sent urgent messengers to Kos begging Hippocrates to come to their aid. Despite the danger and the long journey, the aging physician agreed to travel north, bringing with him a team of his most skilled students. What followed became the stuff of medical legend. Hippocrates spent weeks in Abdera, not only treating individual patients, but studying the plague itself with the methodical approach that had made him famous. He noted that the disease seemed to spread more rapidly in crowded areas, that it affected the poor more severely than the wealthy, and that those who survived appeared to develop resistance to future attacks. These observations led him to develop innovative public health measures that helped contain the epidemic. The success at Abdera established Hippocrates as more than just a skilled physician. He became recognized as a pioneering epidemiologist, someone who could understand disease patterns at the level of entire populations rather than just individual patients. His recommendations for quarantine, sanitation, and public hygiene represented the first systematic approach to community health in recorded history. But Hippocrates understood that his greatest contribution would not be any single cure or dramatic intervention. Instead, he focused increasingly on education and the transmission of knowledge. He recognized that the revolution in medical thinking would only survive if it could be passed on to future generations in a systematic and reliable way. This realization led him to develop what may have been his most important innovation: the first formal medical curriculum. The educational system that emerged on Kos was unlike anything that had existed before. Students did not simply apprentice themselves to individual masters, learning through imitation and repetition. Instead, they followed a structured program of study that combined theoretical knowledge with practical experience. They learned anatomy through careful study of animal dissection and observation of human bodies when circumstances permitted. They studied the properties of medicinal plants through direct examination in carefully maintained botanical gardens. Most importantly, they learned to think like physicians rather than simply memorize treatments. Hippocratic education emphasized the development of clinical reasoning, the ability to observe symptoms, form hypotheses about their causes, and design treatments based on sound theoretical principles. Students were taught to question received wisdom, to test their assumptions through careful observation, and to revise their understanding when evidence contradicted their beliefs. This educational philosophy produced a new type of physician, one equipped not just with specific medical knowledge, but with the intellectual tools necessary to continue learning and advancing the field. Graduates of the Hippocratic school carried this approach with them as they established practices throughout the Mediterranean world, creating a network of rational medical practitioners that would preserve and extend Hippocratic principles long after the master's death. The influence of this educational revolution extended far beyond medicine. The Hippocratic emphasis on systematic observation, logical reasoning, and evidence-based conclusions provided a model that would later inspire developments in natural philosophy, mathematics, and other fields of study. The school on Kos became recognized as one of the great centers of learning in the ancient world, attracting students interested not only in medicine, but in the broader application of rational inquiry to understanding the natural world. As Hippocrates entered his final years, he devoted increasing attention to writing and organizing the accumulated knowledge of his school. The works that emerged from this period would become the foundation of medical literature for centuries to come. These texts were remarkable not only for their medical content, but for their literary quality and philosophical depth. They revealed a mind that saw medicine as part of a larger human endeavor to understand and improve the human condition. The writing style that Hippocrates developed was characterized by careful attention to detail, combined with elegant simplicity of expression. He avoided the ornate rhetorical flourishes that were fashionable among intellectuals of his time, preferring clear, direct language that could be easily understood by students and practitioners. This commitment to clarity reflected his belief that medical knowledge should be accessible to all qualified practitioners, not hidden behind barriers of esoteric language or mysterious ritual. Among his most influential works was a series of case studies that documented actual patient encounters in extraordinary detail. These clinical narratives provided future physicians with models for observation and reasoning that could be applied to their own practice. Each case was presented as a story with a clear beginning, middle, and end, showing how careful observation led to accurate diagnosis and appropriate treatment. The ethical dimensions of medical practice received extensive treatment in Hippocratic writings. These texts explored the complex moral challenges that physicians faced in their daily work, how to balance honesty with compassion when delivering difficult news, how to respect patient autonomy while providing necessary guidance, how to maintain professional boundaries while offering emotional support. These discussions established medicine as not merely a technical craft, but as a moral discipline requiring the highest standards of personal character. The economic aspects of medical practice also received attention in Hippocratic writings. The master understood that physicians needed to earn a living from their work, but he insisted that financial considerations should never override the duty to help those in need. He developed guidelines for setting fees that took into account both the physician's needs and the patient's ability to pay. He also established the principle that emergency care should be provided regardless of the patient's ability to compensate the physician. The relationship between medicine and politics became an increasingly important theme in Hippocratic thought. He recognized that the health of individuals was closely connected to the health of their communities, and that physicians had a responsibility to advocate for public policies that promoted health and prevented disease. This political dimension of medicine would become increasingly important as Greek city-states faced challenges from warfare, trade, and cultural change. The international character of Hippocratic medicine also reflected the cosmopolitan nature of Greek civilization in the 5th century. Students came to Kos from across the Mediterranean world, bringing with them medical traditions from their own cultures. Hippocrates encouraged this exchange of knowledge, recognizing that medical truth could be found in many different traditions if approached with proper scientific methodology. Egyptian medical knowledge, with its sophisticated understanding of surgery and anatomy, was carefully studied and incorporated into Hippocratic practice, where it proved valuable. Mesopotamian astronomical observations contributed to understanding of seasonal patterns in disease occurrence. Persian and Indian approaches to pharmacology expanded the range of available treatments. This synthesis of diverse medical traditions under the unifying framework of rational inquiry created a truly international medical science. The legacy of this international approach would prove crucial to the preservation and transmission of Hippocratic medicine. As political conditions changed and Greek independence declined, the network of physicians trained in Hippocratic methods ensured that medical knowledge could survive the fall of particular cities or kingdoms. The universality of rational medical principles transcended cultural and political boundaries. Women played a more prominent role in Hippocratic medicine than is often recognized. While formal medical training was generally restricted to men, the Hippocratic school recognized the important contributions that women could make to medical practice, particularly in areas related to childbirth, women's health, and the preparation of medicines. Some women achieved considerable reputation as healers within the Hippocratic tradition, though their names and specific contributions have often been lost to history. The Hippocratic approach to mental illness represented another significant advance over traditional practices. Rather than viewing mental disorders as evidence of divine possession or moral failing, Hippocratic physicians sought natural explanations for psychological symptoms. They recognized that emotional disturbances could have physical causes and that mental health was closely connected to overall bodily health. This integrated approach to treating mind and body together would remain influential throughout the history of medicine. The agricultural metaphors that frequently appeared in Hippocratic writings reflected the physician's understanding of the human body as part of the natural world. Just as farmers learned to work with natural cycles and conditions to produce healthy crops, physicians needed to understand and work with the body's natural healing processes. This organic approach to medicine emphasized supporting the body's own recuperative powers rather than imposing treatments that worked against natural processes. The seasonal patterns of disease received particular attention in Hippocratic medicine. Physicians learned to anticipate which illnesses were most likely to occur at different times of year and to adjust their treatments accordingly. Spring brought certain types of fever. Summer increased the risk of digestive disorders. Autumn was associated with melancholic conditions, and winter brought respiratory ailments. This seasonal approach to medicine reflected a sophisticated understanding of the relationship between human health and environmental conditions. The geographic dimension of medical practice also influenced Hippocratic thinking. Physicians trained in the school learned to consider how climate, water quality, soil conditions, and local customs might affect the health of populations in different regions. This environmental approach to medicine represented an early form of what would later be called medical geography, the study of how place and environment influence patterns of health and disease. As the influence of Hippocratic medicine spread throughout the ancient world, it began to encounter and interact with other systematic approaches to healing. In Alexandria, Greek physicians worked alongside Egyptian temple healers and scholars from across the known world. This cosmopolitan environment fostered continued innovation and development of medical knowledge, ensuring that Hippocratic principles would continue to evolve rather than becoming rigid dogma. The Library of Alexandria became a crucial repository for Hippocratic texts, ensuring their preservation and continued study by future generations of physicians. Scholars working in the library created systematic catalogues of medical knowledge, comparing different versions of texts and working to establish authoritative editions that could be copied and distributed throughout the Mediterranean world. The translation of Hippocratic works into other languages marked another crucial step in the international spread of rational medicine. As Greek political influence waned, the medical knowledge developed on Kos found new life in Latin, Arabic, and other languages. Each translation process involved careful consideration of how to convey not just the literal meaning of the texts, but their underlying scientific and philosophical principles. The Roman conquest of Greece in the 2nd century BC marked a pivotal moment for Hippocratic medicine. Rather than suppressing Greek intellectual achievements, the pragmatic Romans recognized the value of Hippocratic medical knowledge and eagerly adopted it into their own healthcare systems. Roman physicians traveled to Greek centers of learning to study the classical texts, and many Greek doctors were brought to Rome as slaves or hired practitioners, carrying with them centuries of accumulated medical wisdom. The Roman military machine, with its vast armies campaigning across 3 continents, provided an unprecedented laboratory for testing and refining Hippocratic medical principles. Military physicians applied the systematic observation methods developed on Kos to treating battlefield injuries, epidemic diseases that swept through army camps, and the health challenges of soldiers serving in diverse climates from Britain to Egypt. These practical applications led to significant advances in trauma surgery, public health measures, and preventive medicine. Roman engineering capabilities allowed for the implementation of public health measures that would have been impossible in earlier eras. The construction of elaborate aqueduct systems brought clean water to major cities, while sophisticated sewage systems removed waste that could harbour disease. Roman physicians, trained in Hippocratic principles, recognized the connection between environmental conditions and public health, advising engineers on the medical implications of urban planning decisions. The establishment of the first hospitals, called valetudinaria, represented a revolutionary application of Hippocratic organizational principles to medical care. These institutions, initially designed to treat injured soldiers and gladiators, embodied the Hippocratic emphasis on systematic observation and record-keeping. Patients were organized into wards based on their conditions, treatments were standardized according to established protocols, and outcomes were carefully documented to improve future care. Roman legal traditions also embraced aspects of Hippocratic medical ethics. The concept of professional responsibility, so central to the Hippocratic Oath, found expression in Roman law governing medical practice. Physicians could be held legally accountable for gross negligence or malpractice, establishing precedents for professional regulation that would influence legal systems for centuries to come. The wealthy Roman elite's enthusiasm for Greek culture and learning created a thriving market for medical services based on Hippocratic principles. Private physicians attending to aristocratic families commanded enormous fees and social status, but they were expected to demonstrate mastery of classical medical texts and to practice according to established ethical standards. This patronage system provided economic support for continued medical research and education. The diversity of the Roman Empire also created new opportunities for medical knowledge to cross cultural boundaries. Egyptian physicians brought their expertise in surgical procedures and pharmaceutical preparations. Celtic healers contributed knowledge of local medicinal plants. Persian doctors shared their understanding of eye diseases and mental disorders. This cultural synthesis enriched the Hippocratic tradition while maintaining its core commitment to rational observation and natural explanations for disease. Roman military expeditions inadvertently served as vectors for the spread of medical knowledge. As legions conquered new territories, they established permanent camps and settlements that required medical support. Local populations observed Roman medical practices and often adopted techniques that proved superior to their traditional methods. Conversely, Roman physicians learned from local healers, incorporating effective indigenous remedies into their own practice. The famous Roman physician Galen, who lived in the 2nd century AD, exemplified the evolution of Hippocratic medicine under Roman influence. Born in Pergamon, trained in Alexandria, and eventually practicing in Rome, Galen synthesized Greek theoretical knowledge with Roman practical experience to create a comprehensive medical system that would dominate Western medicine for over a millennium. Galen's anatomical investigations, based on dissection of animals, since human dissection remained culturally prohibited, corrected and expanded upon earlier Hippocratic understanding of bodily structure and function. His systematic approach to experimentation, including controlled studies of nerve function and circulation, demonstrated how Hippocratic observational methods could be refined and extended through careful scientific investigation. The Roman period also witnessed significant advances in pharmaceutical knowledge, building upon Hippocratic foundations. Roman physicians compiled extensive catalogues of medicinal substances, documenting their preparation, dosage, and therapeutic effects with unprecedented precision. Trade networks spanning the empire provided access to exotic drugs from distant lands, expanding the therapeutic arsenal available to practitioners. Surgical techniques reached new levels of sophistication under Roman influence. The gladiatorial schools, with their constant stream of traumatic injuries, provided opportunities for surgeons to develop and refine operative procedures. Instruments became more specialized and precisely crafted. Surgical texts described complex procedures for treating skull fractures, abdominal wounds, and orthopedic injuries with remarkable detail and accuracy. The Roman emphasis on engineering precision also influenced medical instrument design. Surgical tools were manufactured with careful attention to metallurgy and ergonomics. Standardization allowed instruments to be mass-produced and distributed throughout the empire, ensuring that physicians in distant provinces had access to the same quality equipment as their colleagues in Rome. Women's medical practice under Roman rule reflected both continuity with and departure from earlier Hippocratic traditions. While formal medical education remained largely restricted to men, Roman society recognized the important role of female healers, particularly in obstetrics and gynecology. Some women achieved considerable prominence as medical practitioners, though they often faced legal and social restrictions that limited their official recognition. The Roman legal system's approach to medical practice established important precedents for professional regulation. Laws governing physician licensing, fee structures, and malpractice liability created a framework for ensuring medical quality while protecting both practitioners and patients. These legal innovations demonstrated how Hippocratic ethical principles could be codified and enforced through institutional mechanisms. Roman educational institutions also adapted Hippocratic pedagogical methods to their own cultural context. Medical schools in major cities offered systematic training programs that combined theoretical study with practical experience. Students learned classical texts while also gaining hands-on experience in hospitals, military camps, and private practices. This educational system produced physicians who were both scholarly and practically competent. The economic prosperity of the Roman Empire created unprecedented demand for medical services. Urban populations, with their concentrated wealth and leisure time, could afford to invest in preventive care and cosmetic procedures. This market expansion encouraged medical innovation and specialization, leading to the development of distinct medical subspecialties focused on specific organ systems or patient populations. Roman religious practices also influenced medical development, though in ways quite different from earlier Greek traditions. While Romans maintained formal respect for traditional healing deities, their practical approach to religion allowed for greater integration of natural and supernatural explanations for disease. This religious pragmatism created space for continued development of rational medical approaches within a culturally acceptable framework. The imperial bureaucracy's record-keeping capabilities enabled unprecedented documentation of medical knowledge and practice. Official reports from military campaigns, provincial administrators, and urban magistrates provided detailed information about disease patterns, treatment outcomes, and public health conditions across the empire. This systematic documentation created a vast database of medical information that could be analysed for patterns and trends. Roman engineering capabilities also enabled the construction of elaborate medical facilities that would have been impossible in earlier periods. Bath complexes, with their sophisticated heating and water systems, provided therapeutic environments for treating various chronic conditions. These facilities demonstrated how engineering knowledge could be applied to medical purposes, creating healing environments that supported rather than hindered recovery. The Roman postal system facilitated rapid communication between medical practitioners across vast distances. Physicians could share information about new treatments, consult with colleagues about difficult cases, and coordinate responses to epidemic diseases. This communication network created an early version of the professional medical community that would become essential to continued scientific progress. Trade networks spanning 3 continents brought exotic medicinal substances to Roman markets. Spices from India, herbs from Northern Europe, and minerals from Africa expanded the pharmacological resources available to practitioners. This global access to therapeutic materials encouraged experimentation with new treatments and combinations of existing remedies. The Roman military's systematic approach to logistics also influenced medical supply management. Army Medical Corps developed standardized lists of essential medicines and instruments, established procedures for maintaining medical supplies during campaigns, and created protocols for training field medics. These organizational innovations demonstrated how military efficiency could be applied to medical practice. Roman urban planning incorporated medical knowledge in unprecedented ways. City designers considered factors like air quality, water drainage, and waste disposal when laying out new settlements. Public buildings were positioned to take advantage of favorable microclimates. Markets were organized to minimize the spread of disease. These planning decisions reflected growing understanding of environmental factors in public health. The Roman legal tradition's emphasis on written law also influenced medical documentation. Physicians began maintaining detailed written records of patient encounters, treatment protocols, and therapeutic outcomes. This documentation served both legal and educational purposes, providing evidence in case of malpractice claims, while also creating teaching materials for future practitioners. Roman technological innovations enhanced medical practice in numerous ways. Improved metallurgy produced stronger, sharper surgical instruments. Advanced glass-making techniques enabled the production of more precise measuring devices for pharmaceutical preparations. Better transportation systems allowed for more rapid response to medical emergencies and epidemic diseases. The cosmopolitan nature of Roman society also created new challenges for medical practice. Physicians serving diverse populations needed to understand how cultural differences might affect patient communication, treatment compliance, and therapeutic outcomes. This cultural competency became an important aspect of medical training and professional development. Roman architectural innovations influenced the design of medical facilities. The use of concrete and advanced engineering techniques allowed for the construction of large, well-ventilated hospitals with sophisticated water and waste management systems. These buildings provided healing environments that embodied Hippocratic principles about the relationship between environment and health. The Roman emphasis on practical education also influenced medical training methods. Students learned through apprenticeships that combined theoretical study with hands-on experience under the supervision of established practitioners. This educational approach ensured that new physicians developed both intellectual understanding and practical skills necessary for effective medical practice. As the Roman Empire reached its zenith, Hippocratic medicine had evolved into a sophisticated system of healthcare that served populations across 3 continents. The rational, observational approach pioneered on the small Greek island of Kos had been tested, refined and validated through centuries of practical application. Yet the greatest challenges to this medical tradition still lay ahead, as political upheaval and cultural transformation would test its resilience and adaptability. The gradual decline of Roman political authority in the western provinces during the 4th and 5th centuries AD created new challenges for medical practice. As urban centres contracted and trade networks disrupted, physicians lost access to many of the resources that had supported advanced medical care. Libraries were abandoned or destroyed, medical schools closed, and the systematic documentation that had preserved medical knowledge for centuries began to break down. However, the eastern portion of the Roman Empire, centred in Constantinople, maintained much stronger continuity with classical medical traditions. Byzantine physicians continued to study and practice according to Hippocratic principles, preserving important texts and maintaining educational institutions that would prove crucial for the eventual transmission of medical knowledge to later civilizations. The rise of Christianity as the dominant religion of the Roman Empire created both opportunities and challenges for Hippocratic medicine. Christian emphasis on charity and care for the sick provided strong motivation for medical practice and hospital construction. Early Christian hospitals, often associated with monasteries, maintained high standards of patient care based on classical medical principles. At the same time, some Christian theologians questioned whether the rational, naturalistic approach of Hippocratic medicine was compatible with faith in divine providence and miraculous healing. This theological tension would persist throughout the medieval period, influencing how medical knowledge was preserved, transmitted, and developed within Christian societies. The monastic movement proved particularly important for the preservation of medical texts. Monks copying manuscripts in monastery scriptoriums ensured that key works of classical medicine survived the political chaos of the early medieval period. While some medical knowledge was undoubtedly lost, the core principles of Hippocratic medicine were maintained through these religious institutions. The monastic scriptoriums of medieval Europe became unlikely guardians of ancient wisdom, their candlelit chambers echoing with the scratch of quills, preserving Hippocratic texts for posterity. Brother scribes, many with no medical training themselves, carefully copied Greek and Latin manuscripts, sometimes adding their own marginal notes and observations. These religious communities understood that healing the sick was a Christian duty, and they recognized the value of systematic medical knowledge in fulfilling that obligation. The monastery infirmaries became laboratories where ancient theory met medieval practice. Monks trained in basic medical care applied Hippocratic principles to treating their brothers and the surrounding communities. They maintained herb gardens based on classical pharmaceutical texts, prepared medicines according to traditional formulas, and observed the progression of diseases with the methodical attention that monastic life encouraged. This practical application helped keep medical knowledge alive during centuries when formal medical education had largely disappeared. The Islamic conquest of much of the former Roman Empire paradoxically proved crucial for preserving and advancing Hippocratic medical traditions. As Arab armies swept across the Middle East, North Africa, and into Spain, they encountered sophisticated medical practices in the conquered territories. Rather than destroying this knowledge, Islamic scholars embraced and expanded upon it, recognizing its practical value regardless of its non-Islamic origins. The translation movement that flourished in Baghdad during the 8th and 9th centuries represented one of history's greatest intellectual achievements. Teams of scholars, including Christians, Jews, and Muslims, worked together to translate Greek medical texts into Arabic. These translations were not mere linguistic exercises, but scholarly endeavors that involved careful comparison of multiple manuscript sources, resolution of textual corruptions, and thoughtful adaptation of technical terminology. The House of Wisdom in Baghdad became the premier center for this translation effort. Here, scholars like Hunayn ibn Ishaq, a Christian physician and translator, produced Arabic versions of Hippocratic works that were often more accurate and complete than the surviving Greek originals. These translations preserved medical knowledge that might otherwise have been lost forever, while making it accessible to a new generation of practitioners. Islamic physicians did not simply preserve classical medical knowledge, but built upon it with remarkable creativity and rigor. They established the first systematic hospitals, called bimaristans, which provided free medical care to all patients, regardless of social status or ability to pay. These institutions embodied Hippocratic ethical principles while introducing organizational innovations that would influence hospital design for centuries. The clinical teaching methods developed in Islamic hospitals represented a significant advance in medical education. Students learned through direct patient care under the supervision of experienced physicians, combining theoretical knowledge with practical experience in ways that the original Hippocratic school would have recognized and approved. This hands-on approach produced physicians who were both scholarly and clinically competent. Islamic medical scholars also made significant contributions to pharmaceutical knowledge, building upon the foundation laid by Hippocratic physicians. They established the first systematic pharmacies, developed new methods for drug preparation and standardization, and compiled comprehensive pharmaceutical texts that described thousands of medicinal substances with unprecedented precision. Their work transformed pharmacy from a craft into a science. The experimental approach that some Islamic physicians adopted represented an important evolution of Hippocratic observational methods. Scholars like Al-Razi conducted controlled clinical trials, systematically testing the effectiveness of different treatments and documenting their results with mathematical precision. This proto-scientific methodology demonstrated how classical medical principles could be refined through more rigorous investigation. The geographic scope of Islamic civilization also enabled unprecedented cross-cultural exchange of medical knowledge. Physicians in Cordoba could correspond with colleagues in Cairo, Damascus, and Baghdad, sharing observations about diseases, treatments, and therapeutic innovations. This intellectual network created a truly international medical community that transcended political and ethnic boundaries. Islamic medical education became highly systematized during this period, with established curricula that combined study of classical texts with training in practical skills. Students learned anatomy through dissection, when permitted by religious authorities, studied the properties of medicinal plants in botanical gardens, and practiced surgical techniques under careful supervision. This educational system produced physicians whose competence was recognized throughout the known world. The influence of Islamic medicine extended beyond technical medical knowledge to encompass the philosophical and ethical dimensions of healthcare. Islamic physicians grappled with questions about the relationship between divine providence and natural causation in disease, developing sophisticated theological frameworks that allowed for both faith and reason in medical practice. These discussions enrich the intellectual foundation of medicine while maintaining its practical effectiveness. The Crusades, despite their destructive impact, inadvertently facilitated the transmission of Islamic medical knowledge back to Western Europe. European physicians accompanying the military campaigns encountered medical practices that were far superior to those available in their home countries. They observed Islamic hospitals, learned new surgical techniques, and discovered pharmaceutical preparations that proved remarkably effective. Some European physicians remained in the Middle East after the Crusades to study Islamic medicine more systematically. They learned Arabic, studied classical texts in their most complete and accurate versions, and trained under masters who represented centuries of accumulated medical wisdom. When these physicians returned to Europe, they brought with them knowledge that would transform Western medical practice. The translation of Islamic medical texts into Latin during the 12th and 13th centuries marked another crucial phase in the preservation and transmission of Hippocratic knowledge. Scholars like Gerard of Cremona in Toledo worked to make Arabic medical texts accessible to European physicians, creating Latin versions that would become the foundation for medieval and Renaissance medical education. The establishment of medieval universities provided new institutional support for medical education and research. The University of Salerno, often considered the first medical school in Europe, combined Islamic medical knowledge with classical Hippocratic texts to create a comprehensive curriculum. Students from across Europe travelled to Salerno to study medicine, creating an international community of scholars dedicated to advancing medical knowledge. Medieval surgical practice reached remarkable levels of sophistication through the synthesis of classical knowledge with Islamic innovations. Surgeons like Albucasis had developed techniques for complex procedures, including cataract surgery, the treatment of skull fractures, and the repair of traumatic injuries. Their detailed surgical texts, illustrated with precise drawings of instruments and procedures, provided guidance that would influence surgical practice for centuries. The medieval period also witnessed significant advances in understanding of anatomy and physiology, building upon the foundation laid by Hippocratic physicians. Although human dissection remained restricted in many areas, careful observation of animal anatomy and systematic study of existing texts led to more accurate understanding of bodily structure and function. This anatomical knowledge informed both surgical practice and therapeutic interventions. Medieval physicians developed increasingly sophisticated approaches to diagnosis, combining Hippocratic observational methods with new techniques learned from Islamic medicine. They learned to interpret pulse patterns with remarkable precision, to analyze urine and other bodily fluids for signs of disease, and to recognize the significance of subtle changes in patient appearance and behavior. These diagnostic skills enabled more accurate prognoses and more effective treatments. The pharmaceutical knowledge available to medieval physicians represented a remarkable synthesis of classical, Islamic, and indigenous European traditions. Monastery gardens preserved medicinal plants described in ancient texts, while also cultivating new species introduced through trade and conquest. Physicians learned to prepare complex compound medicines that combine multiple therapeutic agents according to sophisticated theoretical principles. The Black Death that swept across Europe in the 14th century provided a devastating test of medieval medical knowledge and practice. While physicians proved unable to halt the pandemic, their systematic documentation of the disease's symptoms, progression, and patterns of spread demonstrated the continued relevance of Hippocratic observational methods. Their efforts to understand and combat the plague laid groundwork for later advances in epidemiology and public health. Medieval medical ethics continued to reflect Hippocratic principles while adapting to Christian theological frameworks. Physicians wrestled with questions about their obligations to treat dangerous diseases, the appropriate fees for medical services, and the relationship between healing and spiritual salvation. These ethical discussions enriched the moral foundation of medical practice while maintaining its practical focus on patient welfare. The economic dimensions of medieval medical practice also evolved in ways that reflected broader social changes. As European cities grew and prospered, demand for medical services increased correspondingly. Physicians could specialize in particular areas of practice, charging fees that reflected their expertise and reputation. This economic development provided incentives for continued medical innovation and education. Women's participation in medieval medical practice represented both continuity and change from earlier periods. While formal medical education remained largely restricted to men, women continued to serve as healers, midwives, and pharmaceutical preparers in their communities. Some achieved considerable reputation for their medical knowledge and skill, though their contributions were often under-recognized in formal historical records. The medieval period saw the emergence of medical guilds and professional organizations that regulated practice and maintained standards. These institutions embodied Hippocratic principles of professional responsibility while adapting them to medieval social structures. Guild regulations governed everything from apprenticeship requirements to fee schedules, ensuring that medical practice maintained high standards of competence and ethics. Medieval medical literature became increasingly sophisticated, with physicians writing comprehensive texts that synthesized classical knowledge with contemporary observations and innovations. These works demonstrated remarkable erudition, combining theoretical sophistication with practical utility. They served both as educational materials and as repositories of accumulated medical wisdom. The relationship between medicine and other intellectual disciplines also evolved during the medieval period. Physicians studied mathematics, astronomy, and natural philosophy, recognizing that medical knowledge was part of a larger understanding of the natural world. This interdisciplinary approach enriched medical theory while maintaining its practical focus on healing and patient care. As the medieval period drew to a close, Hippocratic medicine had survived and evolved through more than 18 centuries of political upheaval, cultural transformation, and intellectual development. The rational, observational approach pioneered on the Greek island of Kos had proven remarkably adaptable, maintaining its core principles while incorporating new knowledge and techniques from diverse sources. The foundation was now set for the revolutionary changes that would characterize the Renaissance and the dawn of modern medicine. The Renaissance represented a watershed moment for medical knowledge. As European scholars rediscovered classical texts in their original languages and began to question medieval interpretations that had accumulated over centuries. The fall of Constantinople in 1453 brought Greek scholars and manuscripts to Western Europe, providing access to Hippocratic works in their original form rather than through multiple layers of translation and commentary. Humanist scholars applied new techniques of textual criticism to medical manuscripts, comparing different versions and attempting to establish more accurate texts. This scholarly work revealed that medieval medicine had often misunderstood or misrepresented classical teachings, creating opportunities for significant corrections and improvements. The rediscovery of authentic Hippocratic texts provided inspiration for a return to empirical observation and rational inquiry. The invention of printing revolutionized the dissemination of medical knowledge, making classical texts widely available for the first time. Physicians could now own personal copies of Hippocratic works rather than relying on handwritten manuscripts that were expensive and often inaccurate. This democratization of medical literature enabled more physicians to study classical sources directly and to compare different approaches to diagnosis and treatment. Renaissance anatomists like Andreas Vesalius challenged medieval authorities by conducting systematic human dissections and comparing their observations with classical descriptions. Their work revealed numerous errors in traditional anatomical knowledge, while confirming the accuracy of many Hippocratic observations. This return to direct observation exemplified the Renaissance revival of Hippocratic methodology. The artistic achievements of the Renaissance also influenced medical illustration and documentation. Physicians commissioned detailed anatomical drawings that combined artistic skill with scientific accuracy, creating visual representations of the human body that surpassed anything available in earlier periods. These illustrations enhanced medical education while demonstrating the continuing relevance of careful observation in medical practice. Renaissance medical education underwent significant reforms based on rediscovered classical principles. Universities established new curricula that emphasized direct study of ancient texts rather than medieval commentaries. Students learned to read Greek and Latin sources in their original languages, gaining access to the full richness of classical medical thought. This educational approach produced physicians who were both more scholarly and more empirically oriented than their medieval predecessors. The Renaissance emphasis on individual achievement and intellectual independence also influenced medical practice. Physicians gained greater social status and professional autonomy, enabling them to challenge traditional authorities and pursue innovative approaches to diagnosis and treatment. This intellectual freedom created conditions favourable for significant medical advances while maintaining connection to classical foundations. Renaissance exploration and trade expanded the pharmaceutical resources available to physicians, introducing new medicinal plants and compounds from the Americas, Asia, and Africa. This expansion of therapeutic options encouraged experimentation with new treatments while testing the validity of classical theories about drug action and therapeutic principles. The integration of New World medicines with classical pharmacological knowledge represented a significant evolution in therapeutic practice. The printing press also enabled the production of detailed medical texts that combined classical wisdom with contemporary observations and innovations. Renaissance physicians wrote comprehensive works that synthesized traditional knowledge with their own clinical experience, creating medical literature that was both scholarly and practically useful. These texts influenced medical education and practice throughout Europe and beyond. Renaissance scientific instruments enhanced the precision of medical observation and measurement. Improved lenses enabled more detailed anatomical study, while better scales and measuring devices allowed for more accurate pharmaceutical preparations. These technological advances supported the Hippocratic emphasis on careful observation while extending the range of phenomena that could be systematically studied. The Renaissance revival of classical learning also renewed interest in the philosophical and ethical dimensions of medical practice. Physicians studied Hippocratic writings on medical ethics with renewed attention, adapting classical principles to contemporary circumstances while maintaining their essential spirit. This ethical revival strengthened the professional identity of physicians while reinforcing their commitment to patient welfare. As the Renaissance gave way to the early modern period, the Hippocratic tradition had once again demonstrated its remarkable adaptability and enduring relevance. The rational, observational approach that had originated in ancient Greece continued to inspire medical innovation while providing ethical and intellectual foundations that would support the revolutionary advances of the coming scientific age. The journey from the healing temples of Kos to the anatomical theatres of Renaissance Europe revealed the profound continuity that underlies the apparent discontinuities of medical history. History, the dawn of the 17th century, brought with it a spirit of inquiry that would fundamentally challenge the foundations upon which medical knowledge rested. As telescopes revealed new worlds in the heavens and microscopes unveiled hidden realms in drops of pond water, physicians began to question whether the ancient wisdom they had inherited could withstand the scrutiny of systematic investigation. The age of empirical science was dawning, and with it came both validation and revolution for the medical traditions that traced their lineage back to the sacred groves of Kos. The mechanical philosophy that emerged during this period offered a radically new way of understanding the human body. Rather than viewing it as a harmonious balance of mystical humours, natural philosophers began to conceive of bodily functions in terms of mechanical processes that could be measured, predicted, and controlled. The heart became a pump, the lungs a bellows, the digestive system a chemical laboratory. This mechanistic vision seemed to threaten the holistic approach that had characterized Hippocratic medicine for over 2 millennia. Yet beneath the surface of apparent revolution lay profound continuities with the classical tradition. The emphasis on careful observation, systematic documentation, and rational analysis that characterized the new science owed much to the methodological foundations laid down by Hippocrates and his followers. When William Harvey traced the circulation of blood through careful dissection and mathematical calculation, he was applying techniques of empirical investigation that would have been familiar to physicians trained in the ancient schools. The controversy that erupted over Harvey's discoveries revealed the tension between innovation and tradition that marked this transitional period. Conservative physicians, trained in classical theories of blood movement, initially rejected Harvey's claims about circulation. They argued that such radical departures from ancient authority threatened the entire foundation of medical knowledge. Yet Harvey himself consistently appealed to Hippocratic principles of observation and reasoning, claiming that his discoveries represented a return to authentic classical methodology rather than a departure from it. The development of new scientific instruments transformed the possibilities for medical observation during this period. The compound microscope revealed previously invisible structures in blood, tissue, and other bodily substances. Thermometers enabled precise measurement of body temperature, while improved anatomical preparations allowed for more detailed study of organ systems. These technological advances enhanced the physician's ability to observe and document natural phenomena with unprecedented accuracy. The establishment of scientific societies provided new institutional frameworks for sharing medical knowledge and coordinating research efforts. The Royal Society of London and similar organisations created forums where physicians could present their observations, debate interpretations, and collaborate on investigations. These institutions embodied Hippocratic ideals of collective inquiry while extending them through more systematic and rigorous methodologies. The controversy over inoculation against smallpox illustrated both the persistence of classical medical principles and their adaptation to new circumstances. When Lady Mary Wortley Montagu introduced the Ottoman practice of variolation to England in the early 18th century, she encountered fierce resistance from physicians trained in traditional methods. Yet supporters of inoculation appealed to Hippocratic principles of empirical observation, arguing that the evidence of successful prevention outweighed theoretical objections. The systematic documentation of inoculation results represented a significant advance in medical methodology. Physicians carefully recorded the outcomes of thousands of procedures, comparing mortality rates between inoculated and naturally infected populations. This statistical approach to medical evidence represented an evolution of Hippocratic observational methods, extending them through mathematical analysis that would become increasingly important in medical research. The growth of hospital medicine during this period created new opportunities for systematic clinical observation and teaching. Institutions like Guy's Hospital and St. Bartholomew's in London provided physicians with access to large numbers of patients suffering from diverse conditions. This clinical material enabled more comprehensive study of disease patterns and treatment outcomes than had been possible in earlier periods, when most medical practice occurred in private homes. The development of clinical teaching rounds in these hospitals reflected the continuing influence of Hippocratic educational principles. Senior physicians led groups of students through the wards, demonstrating diagnostic techniques and discussing treatment options at the bedside. This hands-on approach to medical education maintained the classical emphasis on learning through direct observation while providing more systematic exposure to diverse clinical conditions. The emergence of medical journalism during this period facilitated the rapid dissemination of new knowledge and techniques. Publications like the medical essays and observations allowed physicians to share their experiences with colleagues across great distances, creating an international community of practitioners united by common interests and methods. This scientific communication network extended the collaborative spirit that had characterized the original Hippocratic school. The Enlightenment's emphasis on reason and systematic knowledge profoundly influenced medical thinking during the 18th century. Physicians increasingly viewed their discipline as a natural science subject to the same rational principles that governed physics and chemistry. This scientific orientation led to more rigorous approaches to diagnosis, treatment, and medical education, while maintaining the humanistic concern for individual patient welfare that had always characterized the Hippocratic tradition. The classification systems developed by physicians like Linnaeus and later Cullen represented attempts to organize medical knowledge according to rational principles. These nosological schemes sought to categorize diseases based on their observable characteristics rather than their presumed supernatural or humoral causes. While often artificial and ultimately unsuccessful, these classification efforts reflected the continuing influence of Hippocratic observational methodology. The development of pharmacology as a systematic discipline during this period built upon the pharmaceutical foundations laid by classical physicians. Researchers began to study the active principles of medicinal plants through chemical analysis, seeking to understand how therapeutic substances produce their effects. This scientific approach to drug action extended Hippocratic pharmaceutical knowledge while providing more reliable methods for standardizing and evaluating treatments. The growth of public health measures during the 18th century reflected the influence of Hippocratic ideas about the relationship between environment and disease. Physicians advocated for improved sanitation, better housing, and cleaner water supplies as means of preventing illness. These public health initiatives demonstrated how classical medical principles could be applied to entire populations, rather than just individual patients. The professional organization of medicine during this period reflected the continuing influence of Hippocratic ethical principles. Medical colleges and licensing bodies established standards for education, practice, and professional conduct that drew heavily upon classical traditions. These regulatory frameworks sought to ensure that physicians maintained the high standards of competence and character that had characterized the medical profession since ancient times. The emergence of medical specialization during the late 18th and early 19th centuries represented both an evolution and a potential threat to Hippocratic holistic approaches. As physicians focused increasingly on particular organ systems or disease categories, there was risk of losing the comprehensive view of the patient that had always characterized classical medicine. Yet the best specialists maintained the Hippocratic commitment to treating the whole person rather than merely addressing isolated symptoms. The development of vaccination by Edward Jenner represented a triumph of empirical observation over theoretical prejudice. Jenner's careful documentation of his experiments with cowpox inoculation demonstrated how classical methods of clinical investigation could lead to revolutionary therapeutic advances. His work validated the Hippocratic emphasis on learning from direct experience, rather than relying solely on inherited authority. The resistance that Jenner encountered from some medical authorities illustrated the tension between innovation and tradition that had always characterized medical progress. Conservative physicians questioned whether such radical departures from established practice could be safe or effective. Yet Jenner's systematic approach to documenting his results and his careful attention to patient welfare embodied the best aspects of the Hippocratic tradition. The statistical analysis of vaccination, results pioneered by physicians like John Haygarth, represented an important methodological advance in medical research. By comparing outcomes between vaccinated and unvaccinated populations, these investigators developed more rigorous approaches to evaluating therapeutic effectiveness. This quantitative methodology extended Hippocratic observational principles through mathematical techniques that would become increasingly important in medical science. The growth of medical literature during this period created new challenges and opportunities for preserving and transmitting medical knowledge. The proliferation of medical journals, textbooks, and treatises made vast amounts of information available to practitioners, while also creating problems of information management and quality control. Physicians needed to develop new skills for evaluating and synthesizing the growing body of medical literature. The internationalization of medical knowledge during the 18th century reflected the continuing influence of the cosmopolitan spirit that had characterized Hippocratic medicine from its origins. Physicians corresponded with colleagues across national boundaries, sharing observations about diseases, treatments, and therapeutic innovations. This global exchange of medical information demonstrated how scientific knowledge could transcend political and cultural divisions. The emergence of medical chemistry during this period provided new tools for understanding bodily functions and drug actions. Chemists like Antoine Lavoisier applied systematic experimental methods to studying metabolic processes, revealing the chemical basis of respiration and other vital functions. This scientific approach to physiology extended Hippocratic naturalistic explanations of health and disease through more precise analytical methods. The development of pathological anatomy during the late 18th century created new opportunities for understanding disease processes. Physicians like Giovanni Morgagni systematically correlated clinical symptoms with anatomical changes observed at autopsy, establishing more precise connections between patient complaints and underlying pathological processes. This anatomical clinical approach refined Hippocratic diagnostic methods through more detailed structural knowledge. The French Revolution's impact on medical education and practice illustrated how political upheavals could both threaten and advance medical knowledge. While the revolution disrupted traditional medical institutions, it also created opportunities for educational reform based on more rational and egalitarian principles. The new medical schools established during this period emphasized practical clinical training and scientific methodology while maintaining commitment to professional ethics and patient care. The emergence of percussion as a diagnostic technique by Leopold Auenbrugger demonstrated how careful observation could reveal previously hidden aspects of disease. Auenbrugger's systematic study of the sounds produced by tapping the chest provided physicians with new methods for detecting internal pathological changes. This diagnostic innovation exemplified the continuing relevance of Hippocratic observational principles while extending them through more sophisticated techniques. The development of medical statistics during this period represented a significant advance in understanding disease patterns and treatment outcomes. Physicians began to analyze mortality data, epidemic patterns, and therapeutic results using mathematical methods that provided more reliable evidence than individual case observations alone. This quantitative approach to medical evidence extended Hippocratic empiricism through more rigorous analytical frameworks. The growth of medical societies and professional organizations during the late 18th and early 19th centuries created new institutional frameworks for maintaining standards and advancing knowledge. These organizations provided forums for sharing clinical experiences, debating therapeutic approaches, and establishing professional guidelines. They embodied Hippocratic ideals of collective inquiry and professional responsibility while adapting them to changing social circumstances. The emergence of medical ethics as a formal discipline during this period reflected the continuing influence of Hippocratic moral principles. Physicians like Thomas Percival wrote systematic treatises on professional conduct that drew heavily upon classical ethical traditions while addressing contemporary challenges. These ethical frameworks sought to maintain the high moral standards that had always characterized the medical profession. The development of clinical medicine as a distinct approach to medical practice during the early 19th century represented a synthesis of classical and modern approaches. Physicians like Philippe Pinel emphasized careful bedside observation, systematic record-keeping, and rational therapeutic decision-making. This clinical methodology maintained the Hippocratic emphasis on individual patient care while incorporating advances in scientific knowledge and technique. The emergence of medical journalism during this period facilitated rapid communication between practitioners and accelerated the pace of medical progress. Medical journals provided forums for sharing case reports, therapeutic innovations, and theoretical discussions. This scientific communication network extended the collaborative spirit of ancient medical schools while reaching much larger and more diverse audiences. The growth of medical libraries and information resources during this period created new opportunities and challenges for medical education and practice. Physicians gained access to vast collections of medical literature while also confronting problems of information overload and quality assessment. The development of indexing systems and bibliographic tools helped practitioners navigate this expanding knowledge base more effectively. As the 19th century dawned, the medical profession stood at a crossroads between tradition and innovation. The rational, observational approach pioneered by Hippocrates had proven remarkably adaptable to changing circumstances and advancing knowledge. Yet the accelerating pace of scientific discovery and technological innovation would soon test this classical foundation in unprecedented ways. The challenge for 19th century physicians would be maintaining the humanistic values and ethical principles of their ancient predecessors while embracing the revolutionary possibilities of modern science. The transformation would prove both profound and continuous, as each generation of physicians built upon the work of their predecessors while adapting to new circumstances and opportunities. Through all these changes, the fundamental commitment to careful observation, rational analysis, and compassionate patient care that had characterized the Hippocratic tradition would persist, providing moral and intellectual guidance for practitioners confronting the challenges of an increasingly complex and sophisticated medical science. The revolutionary changes that swept through 19th century medicine would test every assumption about the nature of disease, the mechanisms of healing, and the very foundations of medical knowledge. As steam engines transformed transportation and electricity illuminated the darkness, physicians found themselves confronting discoveries that seemed to overturn centuries of accumulated wisdom. Yet beneath the surface of apparent revolution, the essential spirit of Hippocratic inquiry continued to guide those who sought to understand the mysteries of human health and suffering. The discovery of anesthesia in the 1840s marked a watershed moment in surgical practice. For the first time in human history, physicians could perform complex operations without inflicting unbearable pain upon their patients. The public demonstrations of ether anesthesia at Massachusetts General Hospital drew crowds of skeptical physicians who witnessed what seemed like a miracle. Patients lay unconscious and motionless, while surgeons removed tumours, amputated limbs, and repaired injuries that would previously have required restraints and incredible tolerance for suffering. Yet this revolutionary advance raised profound questions about the nature of consciousness and the relationship between mind and body. Traditional medical theory had little framework for understanding how a chemical vapour could temporarily suspend awareness while leaving vital functions intact. Some physicians worried that interfering with natural pain responses might disrupt the body's healing processes. Religious authorities questioned whether it was proper to eliminate suffering that might serve divine purposes. These debates revealed how even beneficial innovations could challenge fundamental assumptions about the nature of medical intervention. The systematic study of anesthetic agents that followed their introduction exemplified the continuing relevance of Hippocratic observational methods. Physicians carefully documented the effects of different substances, dosages, and administration techniques. They recorded complications, studied individual variations in response, and developed protocols for safe and effective use. This empirical approach to understanding new therapeutic agents demonstrated how classical principles of investigation could be applied to revolutionary discoveries. The development of antiseptic surgery by Joseph Lister represented another paradigm shift that initially faced fierce resistance from the medical establishment. Lister's systematic application of carbolic acid to surgical wounds dramatically reduced the incidence of post-operative infection, transforming surgery from a desperate last resort into a reliable therapeutic option. Yet his theories about invisible germs causing surgical complications seemed to contradict established understanding of wound healing and disease transmission. The controversy that surrounded Lister's work illustrated the tension between empirical evidence and theoretical explanation that had always characterized medical progress. While skeptical colleagues could not deny the improved outcomes achieved through antiseptic techniques, they struggled to accept the underlying germ theory that Lister proposed to explain these results. This resistance reflected the natural conservatism of a profession that had learned to be cautious about embracing untested innovations. The gradual acceptance of antiseptic principles demonstrated how careful documentation and consistent results could eventually overcome theoretical objections. As more surgeons adopted Lister's methods and achieved similar improvements in patient outcomes, the evidence became overwhelming. This triumph of empirical observation over theoretical prejudice exemplified the continuing relevance of Hippocratic methodology in an age of rapid scientific advancement. The emergence of bacteriology as a distinct scientific discipline during the latter half of the 19th century provided a new framework for understanding infectious disease. The work of Louis Pasteur, Robert Koch, and their colleagues revealed a previously invisible world of microorganisms that caused many of humanity's most devastating illnesses. For the first time, physicians could observe the actual agents of disease under the microscope and study their behavior in laboratory cultures. This microbiological revolution validated ancient observations about the contagious nature of certain diseases while providing precise explanations for phenomena that had previously been mysterious. The Hippocratic emphasis on environmental factors in disease causation found new support in the discovery that specific microorganisms thrived under particular conditions of temperature, humidity, and sanitation. Classical recommendations for isolation of infectious patients gained scientific credibility through understanding of bacterial transmission mechanisms. The development of specific bacteriological techniques created new possibilities for diagnosis and treatment. Physicians could now identify the exact organism causing a patient's illness rather than relying solely on clinical symptoms. This precision in diagnosis enabled more targeted therapeutic interventions and more accurate prognoses. The microscope became as essential to medical practice as the stethoscope, extending the physician's ability to observe pathological processes beyond the limits of unaided human senses. The discovery of vaccination principles through Pasteur's work with attenuated bacterial cultures provided a scientific foundation for immunization that had been lacking since Jenner's empirical observations. By understanding how exposure to weakened pathogens could stimulate protective immunity, physicians could develop vaccines against multiple diseases rather than relying on chance discoveries. This systematic approach to prevention represented a significant advance over earlier empirical methods, while maintaining their essential commitment to protecting health through natural biological processes. The growth of public health as a distinct medical discipline during this period reflected the broader application of bacteriological knowledge to entire populations. Physicians trained in the new microbiology could identify sources of epidemic disease, trace patterns of transmission, and implement control measures based on scientific understanding rather than traditional assumptions. This population-based approach to medicine extended Hippocratic environmental theories through more precise knowledge of disease causation. The establishment of public health departments in major cities created new institutional frameworks for applying medical knowledge to community welfare. These organizations employed physicians who specialized in preventing disease rather than treating individual patients. Their work in improving sanitation, ensuring safe water supplies, and controlling infectious disease outbreaks demonstrated how medical expertise could be applied to protecting entire populations, rather than just individual patients seeking care. The development of medical laboratory science during this period transformed diagnostic capabilities in unprecedented ways. Physicians could now analyze blood, urine, and other bodily fluids with chemical precision, detecting abnormalities that were invisible to clinical examination alone. These laboratory techniques provided objective measurements that supplemented subjective clinical observations, enhancing diagnostic accuracy while maintaining the importance of bedside assessment. The integration of laboratory findings with clinical observations required new skills and approaches to patient evaluation. Physicians needed to learn how to interpret numerical data alongside traditional physical signs and symptoms. This synthesis of quantitative and qualitative information represented an evolution of Hippocratic diagnostic methods rather than a replacement of them. The most effective practitioners learned to combine laboratory precision with clinical wisdom gained through experience with patients. The emergence of specialized medical fields during the 19th century reflected both the growth of medical knowledge and the increasing complexity of therapeutic interventions. Physicians began to focus their practices on particular organ systems, patient populations, or types of disease. This specialization enabled more intensive study of specific medical problems, while raising concerns about fragmentation of patient care. The development of ophthalmology as a distinct specialty illustrated both the benefits and challenges of medical specialization. Physicians who devoted themselves exclusively to eye diseases could develop extraordinary expertise in diagnosis and treatment of visual problems. They created specialized instruments, techniques, and treatments that would have been impossible for general practitioners to master. Yet this focused expertise came at the cost of broader medical knowledge and comprehensive patient assessment. The growth of surgical specialization followed similar patterns, with surgeons developing expertise in operations on specific organ systems or anatomical regions. These specialists achieved remarkable technical proficiency in their chosen areas while sometimes losing the broader perspective that characterized traditional medical practice. The challenge for medical education became maintaining the holistic approach to patient care that had always characterized the Hippocratic tradition while accommodating the need for specialized technical expertise. The establishment of medical specialty societies created new professional communities that facilitated the exchange of specialized knowledge while potentially fragmenting the broader medical profession. These organizations provided forums for discussing specialized techniques and sharing experience with particular types of cases. They also established standards for training and certification in specialized fields, ensuring competence while potentially creating barriers between different areas of medical practice. The development of nursing as a distinct healthcare profession during this period reflected changing concepts of patient care and medical teamwork. The work of Florence Nightingale and her colleagues transformed nursing from an informal activity performed by untrained attendants into a systematic discipline with its own educational requirements and professional standards. This development extended the Hippocratic emphasis on compassionate patient care while creating new forms of medical collaboration. The statistical analysis of patient outcomes that Nightingale pioneered during the Crimean War demonstrated how quantitative methods could reveal patterns invisible to individual observation. Her documentation of mortality rates, disease incidence, and environmental factors provided compelling evidence for the importance of sanitation and nursing care in patient recovery. This statistical approach to medical evidence represented a significant advance in understanding the effectiveness of different therapeutic interventions. The professionalization of nursing also created new opportunities for women to participate formally in medical care. While women had always served as healers and caregivers in their communities, the establishment of nursing schools and professional standards provided systematic training and official recognition for their contributions. This development expanded the healthcare workforce while maintaining traditional emphases on compassionate care and attention to patient comfort. The growth of hospital medicine during the 19th century transformed the settings in which medical care was provided. Large urban hospitals became centers for medical education, research, and the treatment of complex cases that exceeded the capabilities of individual practitioners. These institutions created new opportunities for systematic observation of disease patterns and treatment outcomes, while potentially depersonalizing the physician-patient relationship that had always been central to Hippocratic practice. The development of hospital-based medical education represented a significant advance in clinical training. Students could observe large numbers of patients with diverse conditions, learning to recognize disease patterns and evaluate treatment responses. This exposure to varied clinical material provided more comprehensive education than had been possible through traditional apprenticeship arrangements. Yet it also risked reducing patients to teaching cases rather than maintaining focus on their individual welfare and dignity. The establishment of hospital record systems created new opportunities for accumulating medical knowledge through systematic documentation. Physicians could track patient outcomes over extended periods, compare the effectiveness of different treatments, and identify factors associated with successful recovery. This systematic approach to medical record keeping extended Hippocratic principles of careful observation while providing more comprehensive and reliable data for analysis. The emergence of medical research as a distinct activity during this period reflected growing recognition that advancing medical knowledge required systematic investigation beyond individual clinical practice. Physicians began to design controlled studies to test therapeutic hypotheses rather than relying solely on clinical experience and traditional authority. This research orientation represented an evolution of Hippocratic empiricism through more rigorous experimental methods. The ethical challenges posed by medical research required careful consideration of the physician's primary duty to individual patients. Researchers needed to balance the potential benefits of advancing medical knowledge against the risks imposed on study participants. This tension between individual and collective welfare had always existed in medicine, but became more acute as research methods became more systematic and potentially invasive. The development of medical journals as vehicles for sharing research findings created new forms of professional communication and accountability. Physicians could publish their observations and techniques for review by colleagues, subjecting their work to critical evaluation by the broader medical community. This peer review process helped maintain standards of evidence and reasoning while facilitating the rapid dissemination of new knowledge. The growth of international medical communication during this period reflected the universal nature of scientific knowledge and the common challenges faced by physicians worldwide. Medical conferences, journals, and professional exchanges created global networks of practitioners who shared techniques, observations, and theoretical insights. This international collaboration extended the cosmopolitan spirit that had characterized Hippocratic medicine from its origins while reaching unprecedented scope and sophistication. The technological innovations that transformed 19th century life also influenced medical practice in numerous ways. The telegraph enabled rapid communication about epidemic diseases and medical emergencies. Railways facilitated the transportation of patients to specialized medical centers and the distribution of medical supplies to remote areas. Photography provided new methods for documenting pathological conditions and surgical procedures. These technological advances enhanced medical capabilities while maintaining focus on fundamental goals of healing and patient care. The chemical industry's development during this period expanded the range of pharmaceutical agents available to physicians. Synthetic compounds could be produced in standardized forms with consistent potency and purity. This pharmaceutical standardization improved therapeutic reliability while creating new challenges for understanding drug actions and interactions. Physicians needed to develop new knowledge and skills for managing an expanded therapeutic arsenal. The emergence of medical device manufacturing as a distinct industry reflected the growing complexity and sophistication of medical instruments. Specialized companies began producing stethoscopes, surgical instruments, and diagnostic equipment according to standardized specifications. This industrial production improved the quality and availability of medical tools while potentially distancing physicians from the craftsmanship aspects of their profession. The development of medical insurance and healthcare financing during this period reflected changing social attitudes toward medical care and professional services. As medical interventions became more effective and complex, they also became more expensive and less accessible to those of limited means. This economic dimension of healthcare raised important questions about the physician's obligations to serve all patients regardless of their ability to pay. The growth of medical education as a formal academic discipline created new institutional frameworks for training physicians and advancing medical knowledge. Medical schools developed systematic curricula that combined theoretical instruction with practical clinical experience. These educational programs maintain the Hippocratic emphasis on learning through observation and experience while providing more comprehensive and standardized preparation for medical practice. The establishment of medical licensing and regulatory systems reflected growing recognition of the need to protect the public from incompetent or unethical practitioners. These regulatory frameworks drew upon Hippocratic principles of professional responsibility while adapting them to more complex social circumstances. Licensing requirements ensured basic competence, while professional disciplinary procedures addressed violations of ethical standards. The emergence of medical malpractice law during this period created new forms of accountability for physician actions. Patients gained legal recourse when medical care fell below accepted standards, while physicians faced potential liability for negligent or harmful treatment. This legal framework reinforced professional obligations to maintain competence and provide appropriate care, while potentially creating defensive practices that might interfere with optimal patient treatment. The development of medical ethics as a formal academic discipline reflected growing complexity in the moral challenges faced by physicians. Medical ethicists began systematic analysis of issues like informed consent, end-of-life care, and resource allocation. These scholarly investigations extended Hippocratic ethical principles through more sophisticated philosophical analysis while maintaining focus on fundamental duties to patients and society. The international codification of medical ethics during this period created common standards that transcended national and cultural boundaries. Professional organizations developed ethical codes that addressed contemporary challenges while maintaining connection to classical principles of medical practice. These international standards facilitated cooperation between physicians from different countries while ensuring consistency in professional obligations and expectations. The growth of medical literature during the 19th century created both opportunities and challenges for practicing physicians. The proliferation of medical journals, textbooks, and treatises provided access to vast amounts of new knowledge while also creating problems of information management and quality assessment. Physicians needed to develop new skills for evaluating and synthesizing the expanding body of medical literature while maintaining focus on practical patient care. The emergence of medical criticism and review as distinct activities reflected growing recognition of the need to evaluate the quality and reliability of published medical information. Medical journals began employing systematic peer review processes to assess submitted articles. Professional organizations established standards for medical publications, while individual physicians developed skills for critically appraising medical literature. As the 19th century drew to a close, the medical profession had undergone transformations that would have been unimaginable to the ancient physicians of Kos. Yet beneath the surface of revolutionary change lay profound continuities with the classical tradition. The commitment to careful observation, rational analysis, and compassionate patient care that had characterized Hippocratic medicine remained central to professional identity and practice. The challenge for 20th century physicians would be maintaining these fundamental values while embracing even more dramatic advances in scientific knowledge and technological capability. The dawn of the 20th century brought with it scientific discoveries that would fundamentally reshape humanity's understanding of life itself. As physicians stood on the threshold of a new era, they carried with them the accumulated wisdom of 2.5 millennia, yet faced challenges that would test every assumption about the nature of health, disease, and healing. The ancient oath sworn in the sacred groves of Kos would guide them through discoveries that would make the impossible seem routine and transform medicine from an art of careful observation into a science of molecular precision. The revolution began quietly in a basement laboratory in London, where a young Scottish bacteriologist named Alexander Fleming returned from vacation to find his culture plates contaminated with an unusual mould. What might have been dismissed as sloppy laboratory technique instead became the foundation for one of medicine's greatest triumphs. Fleming's careful observation of how the mould had killed surrounding bacteria exemplified the Hippocratic spirit of learning from unexpected phenomena rather than dismissing them as mere curiosities. The development of penicillin and subsequent antibiotics represented a validation of the ancient belief that nature itself provided remedies for human ailments. Hippocratic physicians had long understood that certain plants and substances possessed healing properties, though they lacked the scientific framework to explain these effects. The discovery that microorganisms could produce powerful therapeutic compounds vindicated the classical approach of seeking medicines from natural sources while providing unprecedented precision in targeting specific disease processes. The systematic development of antibiotic therapy during the 1940s demonstrated how modern scientific methods could accelerate the ancient process of empirical discovery. Rather than waiting decades or centuries to accumulate clinical experience with new remedies, researchers could test potential antibiotics in controlled laboratory conditions and clinical trials. This scientific approach maintained the Hippocratic emphasis on careful observation while compressing the timeline for therapeutic validation from generations to years. The dramatic success of antibiotics in treating previously fatal infections created both unprecedented therapeutic power and new ethical responsibilities. For the first time in human history, physicians possessed medicines that could reliably cure diseases that had killed countless millions throughout recorded history. Pneumonia, tuberculosis, and other bacterial infections that had been death sentences became manageable conditions. This therapeutic revolution validated the ancient dream of conquering disease while creating new obligations to ensure equitable access to life-saving treatments. The emergence of antibiotic resistance during the following decades provided a sobering reminder that nature adapts to human interventions in ways that require constant vigilance and adaptation. Bacteria evolved mechanisms to survive antibiotic exposure, creating new challenges for physicians who had briefly imagined that infectious disease might be permanently conquered. This biological arms race demonstrated the continuing relevance of Hippocratic wisdom about the dynamic balance between health and disease, healing and pathology. The development of vaccines against viral diseases during the mid-20th century extended the preventive approach that had begun with smallpox inoculation. Jonas Salk's polio vaccine and subsequent immunizations against measles, mumps and other childhood diseases transformed public health by preventing illness rather than merely treating its consequences. This preventive orientation reflected the Hippocratic understanding that maintaining health was preferable to curing disease, while achieving it through scientific precision that earlier physicians could not have imagined. The mass vaccination campaigns that followed these discoveries created new models for applying medical knowledge to entire populations. Public health authorities coordinated efforts to immunize millions of children against preventable diseases, demonstrating how individual therapeutic discoveries could be scaled up to protect communities. These population-based interventions required careful organization and systematic implementation that extended Hippocratic public health principles through modern administrative capabilities. The virtual elimination of diseases like polio from entire continents represented one of medicine's greatest triumphs, while creating new challenges for maintaining vigilance against threats that younger physicians had never encountered. The success of vaccination programs meant that many doctors trained in the latter half of the 20th century never saw cases of diseases that had terrorized earlier generations. This epidemiological transition required new approaches to medical education and public health preparedness. The discovery of DNA structure by Watson and Crick in 1953 opened entirely new vistas for understanding the fundamental mechanisms of life and disease. For the first time, physicians could examine the molecular basis of heredity and begin to comprehend how genetic information determined individual susceptibility to illness. This molecular revolution provided scientific foundations for observations that Hippocratic physicians had made about familial patterns of disease, while revealing complexity that ancient healers could never have imagined. The development of genetic testing during subsequent decades created unprecedented opportunities for predicting and preventing disease before symptoms appeared. Physicians could now identify individuals at risk for hereditary conditions decades before clinical manifestations developed. This predictive capability represented a profound extension of the Hippocratic emphasis on prognosis, while creating new ethical challenges about how to manage knowledge about future illness in healthy individuals. The emergence of genetic counselling as a medical specialty reflected the need for specialised expertise in communicating complex probabilistic information about disease risk. These practitioners combined technical knowledge about inheritance patterns with counselling skills designed to help patients and families make informed decisions about genetic testing and reproductive choices. This specialised communication role demonstrated how advancing medical knowledge required new forms of expertise while maintaining focus on individual patient welfare. The technological revolution that accelerated during the latter half of the 20th century transformed virtually every aspect of medical practice. Computers enabled sophisticated analysis of patient data. Medical imaging revealed internal anatomy with unprecedented clarity, and electronic monitoring provided continuous surveillance of vital functions. These technological advances enhanced diagnostic precision while potentially distancing physicians from the direct bedside observation that had always characterized classical medical practice. The development of intensive care medicine during this period created new possibilities for sustaining life in patients who would previously have died from critical illness or injury. Mechanical ventilators could breathe for patients whose lungs had failed. Dialysis machines could filter blood when kidneys stopped functioning, and cardiac monitoring could detect dangerous arrhythmias before they became fatal. These life support technologies demonstrated how engineering principles could be applied to maintaining biological functions. The ethical challenges created by intensive care capabilities required careful consideration of when technological intervention served patient welfare and when it merely prolonged suffering. Physicians needed to develop new frameworks for making decisions about starting, continuing, or withdrawing life support measures. These end-of-life dilemmas had always existed in medicine, but became more complex when technology could sustain biological functions indefinitely, regardless of prospects for meaningful recovery. The emergence of bioethics as a distinct academic discipline during the 1960s and 1970s reflected growing recognition that advancing medical capabilities required systematic ethical analysis. Philosophers, theologians, and physicians collaborated to develop frameworks for addressing moral challenges created by new technologies and treatment options. This interdisciplinary approach to medical ethics extended Hippocratic moral principles through more sophisticated philosophical analysis while maintaining focus on fundamental duties to patients and society. As the gentle waves continue their eternal dance against the shores of Kos, we find ourselves at the end of a journey that spans nearly 3 millennia of human healing. From the sacred groves where a curious young physician first questioned the gods of medicine to the gleaming laboratories where scientists unravel the secrets of DNA, the thread of Hippocratic wisdom has woven itself through every chapter of medical history. The oath sworn in ancient temples still echoes in modern hospitals. The careful observations made by candlelight still guide physicians using the most advanced technologies, and the fundamental commitment to healing rather than harming remains as relevant today as it was when Hippocrates first walked among his patients on this small Greek island. Rest now, knowing that the legacy of the Father of Medicine continues to touch every healing hand and guide every compassionate heart in the eternal human quest to understand and alleviate suffering.